So I work in the Welsh Digital Infrastructure Division in the Welsh Government, and we've worked on a number of infrastructure improvement programmes across Wales. The purpose of this evening, though, is to talk about whether or not 4G broadband will work for you. So what is 4G broadband in simple terms? It is an internet services that uses 4G as opposed to a telephone or fibre line that uses the 4G signal. Some of you might not be able to receive a 4G signal, but let's go through the course of this presentation and discuss what can be done. It's not going to fix everybody's problems, we recognise that, but there are a lot of creative providers out there and creative thinkers on how to fix something, and farmers are very, very good at creative thinking. I know that because I used to work on a couple of farms when I was younger. So the main 4G broadband providers across the UK are EE, 3 UK, O2 and Vodafone. So those are the four main ones. There are also what we call MVNOs, mobile virtual network operators, and these work over the network infrastructure provided by the four main mobile network operators. And there's probably about 100, if not more, of them. But the main four are EE, 3 UK, O2 and Vodafone. The cost, because that's often one of the first questions, how much does this cost? Typically now, the cost of 4G broadband is anything between £22 a month, sometimes even less. I managed to get a tariff up to £17 a month because I was an existing customer, all the way up to £60 a month. There's been a significant decrease in the cost of 4G broadband over the past few months. So if you are coming to the end of your contract, do bear this in mind. Even those who have signed up to recent contracts, I've heard of some farmers and individuals phoning up and renegotiating the contract for a longer period for getting unlimited data, which I think is what people want these days, given the amounts of data people use. So how does it actually work? Well, most of you will have seen a mast as you're driving around the countryside. This is one in mid-Wales. Mobile operators' masts like this one must have and will have high capacity internet links because they have to get their broadband from somewhere. So they'll either do this with a direct fibre connection or they'll use, probably less and less now, they'll use what are called dish links. So those are the little white dishes which are on the highlighted on this picture here. And that normally connects up to one of the mast which has a fibre connection. The 4G signal is then transmitted from such mast and then travels to your property. If unobstructed, believe it or not, leaves on the trees can make a little bit of a difference. You do find in the winter time that things speed up just a little bit. But anyway, the purpose is the signal comes across bringing you faster broadband. It's received either by an indoor or ideally an outdoor mobile broadband router, and we'll come to that later on in the slides. But very simply put, you have a mobile mast, you have a receiving router either in the house or mounted externally, and you get broadband that way. Now we know there's a lot of premises without mobile broadband, generally speaking, or they might think that they might not be able to get mobile broadband, certainly on the inside. And part of the challenge in Wales is, if you look at a slide from Ofcom, comparing the amount of masts required to transmit TV pictures in Wales. So to reach 1 million people on the terrestrial TV network, you need 67 masts to reach 1 million people. Compare that in England, 12.5 masts, and even in Scotland, it's still less at 45. So in Wales, because of the hills, because of the lovely green hills that we have, you need more masts to reach more people, and it's as simple as that, and that's part of the challenge that we have.
Sorry Peter, allai just ddod ar draws yn gyflym. Alli di wneud y sgrin yn llawn, please? Mae'r nodiadau ar hyn o bryd. Sorry.
ddrwg gen i. Mae o'n llawn gyda fi ar hwn. Diolch yn llawn ar... O, tiwch yn bach. Hwn i. Sori am hyn. Mi dyna i... Tiwch i just dechrau hwn eto. Reit, di hwnna'n sgrin llawn wan?
Dwi'n meddwl bod hwnna'n iawn, diolch Peter.
OK, ddrwg gyda am hynna. Mae'n dylse bod wedi cofio tro blaen pan nes i testio hwn efo ffion. OK, how does it work? The mobile operators use different frequencies known as bands. And these, so it's not just a 4G signal. There's a bit of technology behind this, or radio waves to be specific. And these bands might impact on farm speeds. Generally speaking, the higher the frequency, a bit like your Wi-Fi, for example, that can run at 2400 megahertz or 5000 megahertz. Generally, the higher the frequency, the higher the speed available from the 4G operator. There's some example frequency bands below there, which I use around in Wales. The 800 megahertz is a very popular one because it's a lower frequency. It actually travels around bends and hills a little bit better than, say, band 7, which is 2600 megahertz, which don't travel as far. But if you're not far from a mast that offers a band 7 or band 1 or band 3, for example, then you're more likely to get faster speeds. So how is 4G broadband different to regular broadband? First of all, it doesn't need a phone line to work. Sorry, I just had something on my screen there. It can slow down, for example, if somebody decides to hold a concert in a nearby field, or if the mobile mast comes under heavy use, that can affect the speed of it. Data caps do exist. Some of you might be on a data cap tariff, but unlimited tariffs are now widely available. Rarely do you see data caps on standard telephone or fiber line broadband connection these days, and 4G broadband is following suit pretty rapidly. Externally mounted equipment does provide a better service, and there's an example of this in the next slide. So I did this test using an operator that I'm currently not using. I just put another operator SIM card, and I'm not going to be naming operators here because I am impartial and independent. But here's a 4G router that I've got on the windowsill here. It wasn't facing the mast because in this shed here, I haven't got a window that faced the local mast, which is about a mile away. But the indoor speed test provided me with 34 megabits download speed and 13 megabits upload speed. But when I tried the test by mounting it on a pole outside on my daughter's climbing frame, of which she wasn't very amused, the broadband speeds shot up from 33.2 megabits per second to 82, which is absolutely staggering. That's faster than my home fiber to the cabinet connection, which I get 48 megabits. So taking this type of equipment outside makes a world of difference. And it's not just the download speed. You'll notice the upload speeds also shoot up as well, and that's handy for sending lots of data and doing video calls. So the benefits of 4G broadband, it can serve either as your main, your primary, or secondary broadband connection. I have 2 broadband connections at home now, because if one fails, how can we work from home? It is essential. Upload speeds, as I mentioned, might be higher, useful for sending data and video calling. I hope my video feed is clear. But it also gives you a bit more choice and competition as well. So when I negotiated my telephone line broadband service, I said to the ISP, I said, well, can you beat the price, because I'm being offered a better deal with the mobile operators, and they did take note, and they did give me a good deal for that. And you can also, with mobile broadband, lower your costs. So, for example, I don't need in this kind of setup that I've got here a telephone line, I can use what's called voice over IP. So I have 2 voice over IP phones with me here. They don't cost me hardly anything a month, and they all work over this 4G connection. So there's some cost saving potentials with this as well. The type of technologies to get you connected, there's a range of choices really. You've got the devices that the mobile operator will provide generally for free as part of a contract, which will work very, very well indoor. One of our ministers, for example, has such a device, and you know they're receiving 50 megabits upload and download. Fantastic, and they're in a rural area. There are some models that are provided free that can support external antennas, which you can go buy off eBay or whatever, and stick it just outside the window. That can help. Or I think more commonly for very, very rural parts of Wales, where there is little signal in some parts, you can purchase a custom solution to include the above, or have devices where the antenna and the router is all in one unit, which helps with the signal, and they're specifically designed for external use. So this is an example. These are my equipment here. So I have a indoor 4G router, which I don't generally use, to be honest. Now I'm using the one on the right hand side, the bottom on the pole, which is like a dish, and that provides me with faster broadband. But there are different models, for example, that you can get, and you know, there are suppliers out there that will fit and install these types of devices, and we'll come to that in a little while. So in terms of getting connected to a service, if you've got a mobile signal, you know, it could be that you could get a router device similar to the one which I showed there, which is a bit bigger than these MiFi devices, the one on the left there. And you can get that for free from your mobile network operator. It's a case of understanding who's offering a mobile signal. So I'm not talking about the virtual network operators, I'm talking about the 4 main operators, the 3 UK, Vodafone, EE and O2. If you're lucky enough to have a choice of networks, you might want to do a speed test with either network to determine the best performance and the price. So at this moment in time, I'm not with the you know, the most expensive provider, but the performance is good enough for what I want it to do. And another option is, of course, you might want to choose a local 4G broadband specialist. Support for this, there is grant support. We have what's called the Access Broadband Cymru scheme. It's been running for a number of years now. It's a scheme that provides a grant to either fund or part fund the installation of a new broadband connection for a home or business. As farmers, you'd be classed as a business, but it doesn't include the running costs, so no rentals there. The new connections on this must deliver a step change in the speeds that you have, with at least double your current download speeds. So if you're going to get over 10 or 20 megabits up to over 30, then generally you know you can qualify for the grant. It is just to clarify, it's doubling of the download speeds. There's a little indicator there. There's £400 available for 10 megabits or more, and £800 for 30 megabits and above. There's a lot more information on that on the website gov.wales/broadband, and you can email my colleagues broadband@gov.wales. But you might recognise some of the names I've listed here, which I've had from my colleagues who are one of a number of providers that we have working on the Access Broadband Cymru scheme. But these specific ones offer 4G solutions. As far as we're aware, these are the only ones that offer this. Now, there are lots of new ones starting to come on board as new technology is improving. So we might have missed one or two off this list, but that's the list as it stands. Does this technology work for me? Well, I'm speaking with you now. It hasn't failed so far, touch wood. The service I'm using technically doesn't reach where I live. You can see the little marker on the map there. I'm in a white space. It means I should have no coverage. But by sticking the dish on top of a scaffolding pole, which I've done, and this photo was taken this afternoon, and I have got the news streaming behind me, working through the broadband connection, as well as the CCTV working off a different network. It's behaving itself, and this is from a mast that is 5 miles away. So I like to practice what I preach, everybody. Questions, and I hope you understood. Can't see any questions on this, Owain. Oh, hold on, I've got Q&A here.
Ti'n gweld yr cwestiynau? Ti eisiau na i ddarllen nhw allan eto?
I can see, yeah, mae yna ddau cwestiwn yma.
Na i ddarllen y cwestiwn allan.
Okay, yeah, na fo'n iawn.
So we'll start with the questions now. If anybody else has got any questions, send them in now and we'll go through them slowly. So we'll start with the first one that came in from Gweithio, who received Welsh Government funding for 4G internet years ago. That was for satellite internet, which we had to pay for an upgrade, a new dish, she says, and it didn't work, unfortunately. It was expensive, too slow, and wasn't fit for purpose. Is he now able to get the new funding for external 4G router, or has he used his funding up?
No, we'd be happy to support him in that example. And just to note, if any of you have issues with any provider, I mean, at the end of the day, the choice of who the customer goes to is the choice of the customer. Those names I've mentioned, you know, are not an endorsement of the Welsh Government in any form or way. The choice is down to the customer. So do shop around, do ask your neighbours if they're using a provider, and do some research from that regard. But yeah, we'd be happy for that. Like I said, it's all about increasing speed. When the grant support scheme first came out, going back a while now, we were trying to get people over 0.5 megabit connection. So it just shows how things have improved. We'd like people to get over 30 megabits as much as we can.
Great. So what about, you showed the map there of yourself just outside where it actually covers. So what about if you don't have mobile signal at all on your farm?
Okay, so it's when people come to me and say I've got no mobile signal, I often ask them, well, have you checked all of the mobile operators, and have you checked with all of the frequency bands? So for example, there's one operator which I'll name because they're the only ones that have this feature on their website, 3 UK. You put in your coverage, you put in your postcode in the coverage map there, and they might say that you don't have coverage. But then if you put a new device like an iPhone X or something like that, what happens, it overlays that with the 800 megahertz band, and all of a sudden you find, oh gosh, I have got 4G, but it's the slower version. So one, you absolutely need to double check that you have no signal. And then number two, I would speak to one of the suppliers that I listed, because I know at least 2 of them there are quite creative in how they get 4G in valleys. So for example, they might put a structure up on the top of the valley, for example, which can get a signal and beam that down to maybe 2 or 3 dwellings down below. So don't kind of give up on that front.
Great. And yeah, on the back of that, there someone here curious, about what service provider you use. I don't know if you want to answer that or not.
I'd better not, if I'm honest.
Fair enough. So we'll move on quickly. So I think you've explained how to see if you've got a coverage. How can you do your own speed test on the farm for your current?
Okay. So there are a couple of speed tests. Well, there are more than one speed test servers, and what I find, some of them bring variable results. So if you go into Google and just type speed test, for example, you should get some coming up there. There is speedtest.net. There's speedof.me is another one. There are several ones out there, and you can also, if you're kind of really keen on the results, you can also select different speed test servers to see if the results vary, and they do, to be honest with you. But so it's worth just checking and double checking. And also, if you are doing a speed test, just make sure that you do it ideally outside, you know, at a high part of the farm, because that will give you an indicator of what speed you should get. For example, if you decide to work with a supplier or do your own thing, and stick a device, you know, on your rooftop or on your shed. I've known people sticking these on top of sheds to get the best signal, and height makes a difference. But you know, be very careful if you go about doing this yourself, of course.
Thank you, Dirk. So the next thing is you talked about variable service from the speed test. What about how variable is the 4G service? Should you install it? Is it continually good? Or?
Okay, so on the service that I'm using, which I'm not paying a lot of money for, and you know, so admittedly it's probably not the, you know, the fastest, but I've never seen it dip below 30 megabits. But late at night sometimes, or different parts of the day, sometimes I'll see it shoot up to 50 or 60 megabits. But one thing that is consistent is the upload speed. It is usually around 30 megabits per second, pretty much continuously all the time. And that's great for video calls.
So I'll try and find another one here. So Catherine has sent a question in saying, we have no 4G connection or any mobile signal at all at present near to the property. Will this apply to us? Or?
Again, if you speak to one of the 4G suppliers, they would be able to determine, you know, how kind of far away you are from a signal, and see if there's a way that, you know, that they can bring the signal to you using specialist equipment. I mean, I have to be honest, I travel, you know, I used to travel a lot across Wales before the lockdown, and I've been to some, you know, really rural areas, you know, the back roads from Tregaron over to Bilth, you know, Cwm Ystwyth. Okay, there's no mobile signal right in Cwm Ystwyth, but if you go a little bit up on the hill, there is. Do you know what I mean? It's there are options here. So I remember speaking to a gentleman years ago, of which I might be able to send you a web link of a video he did when he finally got fibre. So he had no mobile signal where he was living. He was living in a dip just off the coast of Aberystwyth. He spoke to me and said, well, he was a bit of an engineer, so he was, you know, in a good position to kind of set things up himself. And this was before, you know, we had any number of 4G suppliers like we have today. And what he did was he put a 4G router on the top of his hill. He managed to get power to it, and then he beamed that down, I think it was with a fibre cable at the time, down to his property. So he found a way of making that happen.
You said there that you beamed it down using a fibre optic cable. So there is a question here. Does the distance from the mast to the house, or from where the signal comes in to the house, have a bearing in weakening the broadband speed?
If you're talking about, if it's your own custom solution, no, it wouldn't. But if you're far away from a mobile mast, then yeah, it does have a bearing. But that's why having an external antenna with a good kind of dish to capture the signal makes all the difference, to be honest. They call them high gain antennas because they're gaining you know, an extra signal which you normally would never get on a mobile phone.
Okay, thank you. I understand there's a lot of questions coming in, but keep them coming in. We'll try and open as much as we can. But I apologise now if we don't answer yours tonight, but we'll look at getting you the answer somehow. So the next one about the grant. You mentioned there's up to £800 grant for installation costs, for installing the system, external system with short mast on house chimney. Sorry, there is an £800 grant for installing the system, but what is the total cost of an external system with short mast on house chimney likely to cost?
Okay. The equipment which I showed you, or I've got one here. This one here, for example, you can buy. I think it's about £145 plus the VAT. Okay. In this device, you have a 4G router. You plug in what's called an Ethernet cable in here, and then you take it to the house, and then you put what's called a Wi-Fi access point in the house. So the total equipment cost is probably in the region of £200. You know, the basics. But if you're configuring and setting all of that up and having engineers visits, you know, they might charge, you know, £600, £700, £800 for that service. But that's typically the cost of the hardware. So yes, you can either do it yourself, or you can get a provider in. But the equipment isn't that expensive these days.
Okay, thank you. This one's just come in, I've noticed. We are currently using a 4G signal with a small router and no external aerial. Is there advice on how to choose a hardware solution, aerial dish router, to install ourselves, or would you recommend going via ABC funding and one of the suppliers you listed?
Yeah, so that's a good question. So if there's if the speed you're receiving now, because it's indoor, isn't giving you the best signal, the best service, then yeah, you would qualify for the grants, generally speaking. Or if you decided, well, you know, I don't really need a grants and you know, a professional installation, I want to do this myself, then the best advice is to, again, go out to Google and, you know, search for 4G routers, but try and search for one with an integrated antenna and router built in. The performance of them generally work a little bit better because you don't have any losses between the antenna and the router itself. That's all. That's what I would recommend. I can't recommend any brand or make, I'm afraid.
Fair enough.
But you know, they are out there. There's quite a lot of them out there now. Okay.
I have a scenario for you here. Someone who has experience of having their property tested for 4G. It says that BT have tested our property for 4G, and they've said that we have 3 bars out of 5, but could not say what speeds we would get. Any thoughts on that?
Yeah, no, I mean, it's a fair comment. They wouldn't be able to say, you know, how much speed, you know, they would get. I mean, let me give you an example. Let me just bear with me if I can show you a screen on this on my machine here. Bear with me. Right, I'm not sure if I can. If I just stop sharing this screen and share another interface. Bear with me. Okay. So you can probably see what I've got on my screen now, hopefully.
Yeah.
Okay. So here are some of the kind of technical factors. You know, nobody in a call center isn't necessarily going to tell you what these values are in your 4G router. For example, you know, a high CQI value, you know, the higher it gets, the better. You can see it varies there because the leaves on the trees are blowing outside. You have what's called the signal to noise ratio, which is, you know, is fluctuating. It is a temporary installation that I've got in my garden, but this data would provide a professional installer with valuable information as to how to you know, optimize the equipment, you know, on the farm. Once that's optimized, yes, you've got a better chance of getting a really good connection to the mast. But then, how busy is the mast? You know, if you've got lots of campers, for example, using MiFis in the vicinity, that might slow the service down. But whoever's got the strongest signal will kind of rise above everybody else in terms of performance. So it's a very subjective question to answer, I'm afraid. But the good news is 3 out of 5 bars is there. So the chances are, if they did have an externally mounted router, things would improve things significantly for them. So.
Good. Ideal. A good question has come in from Gethin here. So will new building be eligible for this grant? So if they currently do not have wired phone line and therefore will not double their existing service megabytes per second as per requirement, are they still eligible for this grant?
Yeah, if it's you know, a new build and it's registered you know, with council and everything else, then yeah. That'd be fine. Just a word of advice on new builds, depending on where they're located, but general advice is wherever you can. So, for example, if you're in an area where there is fibre, for example, your neighbours have it and you don't, do engage with Openreach's new sites team as soon as you can. Again, if you Google Openreach new sites teams, they have a dedicated portal and contact information, which enables you to engage with them. It may be possible for you to get, you know, a full fibre connection that way and not use 4G, but you don't know until you engage with them. Some people have done this, I'm aware of it.
Good. Thank you very much. I think you might have answered most of this next question there, really. So anonymous question saying, we are in a new build farmhouse. Our provider has failed on providing a landline / broadband. We use a MiFi with 30 gig data a month, 4G. Would they be eligible for a grant to have and not bother with a landline, etc.?
Well, there's you could do that, but if another thing that we haven't really touched on this presentation, there's something that's been introduced recently. It's called the universal service obligation. If you go to bt.com, I'll send you the web links at the end of it.
Yes.
If you can get a mobile signal and you are you know, with BT, for example, they will generally send out a MiFi router for you. You know, and you can kind of, it's like an alternative to the landline. There's more information on the web link that I'll send, and generally about, you know, why there is a universal service obligation. But it's worth reading. But of course, you know, these things can take time, and people want broadband now. So what's the, you know, the quick path? It is possibly one of these devices.
So another user has sent in over his phone. He has 18 megabytes per second download and 6 megs per upload, but sometimes lose connections in the middle of a conference call. Why is this, and what would you consider a good speed for download and upload?
A good speed, yeah. I mean, you could say 10 megs is fine. You know, it'll support most things that we need to do. Why is it dropping out? I really wouldn't know. I mean, so far, touch wood, I haven't had any dropouts on this call. Generally, and you know, I'm going through a 4G broadband connection, and I've got to say, throughout the day, you know, the past 3 months I've been using it, it's fine. It might depend on the handsets, or the signal isn't that strong, and you know, it's dropping out because of that. And so it might be worth maybe trying another device.
Fair enough.
It's really hard to answer that, I'm afraid. Some of these.
Fair enough. Yeah. Next questions coming here. Am I right in believing that Fibre Connect development officers will be given the list you put up earlier with companies that can deliver? Because the questions come in asking you to show that again. But if you want to get in touch with your local development officer, we'll have possession of that list, or you can put it up again if you want. But did you say that wasn't a full list? It might be new companies added to the list.
There might be, but this is the latest one that I had. And bear in mind, you know, we're very lucky in rural Wales. We've got a number of very good wireless providers. So these aren't 4G providers, but they're using wireless technology similar to this. And of course, if you're getting a good service from them, you know, they're not affected by potential variances in the 4G networks, for example. So those need to be considered as well, and these as along with the 4G router service. But again, you know, ask your friends, ask your family if they're in this situation, what provider they're using, and you know, are they happy with their service provider?
So there's a few questions coming in about the signal that comes after you've got the signals from the router. How far will the signal cover? So I'm trying to reword it as I'm reading it. Can the signal from this router cover a large farmyard, for instance, so that digital carving cameras, for instance, can be fitted?
Yeah. So the device I've got on the screen here, that little white box, if you can see, on the pole there, that one also sends out a Wi-Fi signal, as well as taking a broadband service into the house. So you could either, you know, get an all-in-one box like that, or you could ask your supplier, you know, as part of the overall fit, you know, what could they do? I mean, the grant is there for, you know, getting a broadband connection, but you know, I'm sure my colleagues, it all depends on the costs and so on. You know, we can't kind of fund CCTV and everything else, but if the box the supplier uses happens to have a built-in Wi-Fi signal as well, then I don't see a problem in that.
Great. So I think Hugh here has the same problem that I do. He's asking, how far can you have the antenna away from the farmhouse? So if you're in a hilly area, can you, for instance, put it on top of the hill and get it down to the house somehow?
Yeah. If you've got power at the top of a hill and you can then see the house from the top of the hill. Now, don't worry a little bit how you get power there, because you can get, you know, small wind and solar solutions. You know, even if it's 3 miles away and you've got a full signal on top of the hill from one of these boxes, so long as it can kind of see line of sight the property, then it would work. You can get what are called building-to-building wireless links. One for that range would probably cost about £250–300 for a half decent spec device, and then you would have to worry about, you know, obviously getting the cable into the house and then having some other router in the house to bring the actual Wi-Fi in the house or the rest of the farm. It's just networking equipment, basically. So yeah, it can be done, or you can run, either a fiber cable, an armored fiber cable is about £1 a meter, I believe, and do it that way. And then the bits that light up the fiber on both ends are about £50, and they can run for several miles. I know it gets more expensive the longer the fiber cable, but it is plug and play as well, a lot of these things.
Thank you. One farmer has had a quote for unlimited 4G broadband for £30 per month. He just wants to know, is that a good quote, or?
Yeah, generally that is. If you look at the, from my own research, from what I've kind of seen and experienced, and I think it was £22 a month to £60 a month. Not all the mobile providers seem to be advertising SIM cards dedicated for 4G routers. SIM cards off a normal phone will actually work in these as well, but when you phone them up, that's where you get the best negotiation, I think, from what I've been told anyway. But yeah, I would say £30 a month is acceptable when you compare the cost of landline and broadband. It's competitive.
On that, really, so a couple of questions come in from Dalith. And you said you yourself haven't got a landline now. Do you still have a landline number? So could she keep her old number if using this system?
Yeah. Well, I do have a landline in the house. This is my man cave in the garden, and I have two lines coming in. One of them is, well, I'll show you. It's a bit of an antique phone. It's from a friend of mine who used to work in the RAF, and I've just disconnected it. But this is as old as me. This is a 1974 phone, and I've plugged it into a voice over IP adapter, which is about 15 years old. That works, and then I've just got a normal kind of voice over IP phone here. That works. I do not need a landline, and this technology isn't new. Like I said, the voice over IP adapter, which you can plug any old phone to, is 15 years old.
Okay, great. So how much capacity is in the system for growth in usage? So when the number of things you connect with evolve, and if you have numerous holiday cottages using the same one, would it be strong enough to cover, say, 3 holiday cottages and the ever-increasing amount of tech in homes and on farms?
Yeah, that's a good question. The answer is, if you've got, if you're getting decent speeds, yes, it would, because, people think, if you're getting a 50 megabits mobile broadband connection and you connect it to 3 holiday cottages, that is not going to be enough. The thing is, not everybody uses 50 megabits at the same time. In fact, how much am I using on this call now? So I've got streaming video behind me. It's using about 10, I think. And I'm kind of loading the connection up on purpose with a Teams call. So I think, yes, it'll be enough. There's something called Nielsen's law, where the use of bandwidth almost doubles every 2 years, I think it is. The operators are aware of this, which is why they are repurposing a lot of the radio spectrum that they've got for 3G now for 4G. And of course, when 5G will be rolled out, the speeds will get even higher. A few years ago, 1 megabit was fast. Now it's slow.
Yeah. That was actually my next question. Will 4G be relevant when 5G is imminent? You've just
the first 4G test in the UK in a rural area was off the Preseli mast, because it was one of the first areas to switch over to the digital TV service, which meant some of the radio spectrum was free for 4G. That was in 2011. I think it was January 2011 I visited that mast, and they were talking about 4G, that it was going to be out, you know, straight away. It did take, you know, a number of years, and it'll be the same with 5G. What you're going to find with 4G is they're going to reuse a lot of the radio spectrum that was used for 2G and 3G, and then make that available for 4G. So the Royal Welsh Showground is a classic example, where there's a mast there which is sending out 150 megabits per second when nobody's there. But even when it's kind of fully loaded, during the last show, I was doing a speed test of 83 megabits per second over the 4G network. And that's because the operator in question has reused intelligently the radio spectrum it had available for it. So
Okay.
it's you know, 4G is not dead.
Right. Okay. Still has a future. So an anonymous listener has just messaged in saying, we've been told by a local 4G Wi-Fi supplier that we can have 4G Wi-Fi on the farm, but the upload and download speed might still be less than 10 megs. We've been told that we shouldn't worry with the upload and download speeds, as we've got a much better ping rate. What does this ping rate mean?
So, okay, there was the word might there, fair enough. Okay, I'm not sure how to answer that question. Ping rate latency is important. That's the kind of delay. So when you're talking, how much of a delay there is. So on a very good fiber to the cabinet broadband connection, you know, you might get a ping rate of 14 milliseconds, for example. That's what I had next door. But on this one, I think I'm getting something like 40 or 50 with my provider. Some providers I know that are out there that would provide less. But this seems to be working fine for us. Yeah. And you know what I mean? It's if you're an avid computer gamer, then the ping rate, the lower the ping time, the better, because you know that those extra milliseconds might mean if you've lost the game or not. But people do play online games on mobile broadband, and you know it is getting better and better. Okay.
So back to the grant for more information on that. How long is it around for? Is there a rush to use it, or?
No, the grant is there. You know, we have somewhere in the region of 96,000 premises in Wales that we need to get up to 30 megabits or more. It's a big job building infrastructure. It's a big job building fibre. We embarked on the Superfast Cymru programme back in 2013. We're still building infrastructure. So whilst there are people without decent speeds, it's unlikely that, you know, the grant would disappear. You know, our Access Broadband Cymru scheme has been running, I think, since 2004. Or there's been different versions of it. So it's been around a while, but there we go. People need connectivity, and especially now.
Yes, definitely. So staying on the grant, people are intrigued on how you actually go about expressing an interest in this grant. Where do you go? Who do you talk to?
Okay, so there's two options. So the providers that are listed engage regularly with our team. So they can either go in through their provider, or they can contact the broadband team directly. And there's the website, of course. They are accepting applications electronically, and they are turning them around as fast as they can. But you know, in the first instance, I would advise to, you know, find yourself a provider or decide what you want to do. If you decide that you want to kind of do something yourself and buy the kit and claim a grant from us, you know, engage with us at the onset. You know, don't go and buy something and then try and claim retrospectively. You know, do speak to us. But the path of least resistance is probably, you know, speak to a provider because they deal with this, you know, with the technicalities every day.
Great. So staying on the grant, I think you answered this in the presentation, but I'll ask you just in case. So can you explain the difference between the 10 meg grant and the 30 meg? So the grant for the 10 meg and 30 meg.
Yes, I stumbled on that, didn't I? My apologies.
Okay.
Where was it? You can tell I don't deal with the grants. So new connections through the scheme must deliver a step change in speed. So this is what you're getting kind of now. So if you're going to double your speed, for example, a current connection of 10 megs must improve to at least 20 megabits. So that will qualify for the £400 grant. But for the
So is that the minimum speed that you've got to have to be eligible for this grant?
No, your minimum speed could be half a meg.
So just double, it doesn't have a minimum.
I'm sorry, say again.
So is it just to double your original speed? It doesn't have to have a minimum.
Yeah, there's a bit of crackle on the line.
Sorry,
I think
it's me.
Yeah, I can hear you clear now. Yeah, I think a minimum speed is like, well, that could be. I've spoken with someone the other week. They were getting 0.2 of a megabit. They've now got 30 megabits. They would qualify for a grant. So when we say minimum, it's like, how low can we go, I suppose?
Yeah.
I'm sure there are plenty on this call with terrible broadband speeds, and if there's a solution out there that can take it, just to 10 megabits, I'm sure they'd be welcome to get that funding. But of course, the more speeds that you get a little bit more grants. Again, this is all very subjective, which is why it's worth speaking with a provider to determine, what technology and what service provider, being the mobile network operators, and what speed that can be delivered is before you kind of dive in on the grants side. The good news is there's a grant, there's support, and very rarely do people have to dig in their own pockets. It's one of the most generous grant schemes in the UK.
What if somebody has already or just installed 4G Wi-Fi? Are they able to claim that installation cost back, or is it apply for the grant?
No, not if it's retrospectively. No, okay. That's just common grant rules, I'm afraid.
Yeah.
I mean, but if they've got, if they've had a supplier, one of the large operators have given them a MiFi and it's not performing, as expected, then they could upgrade to an externally mounted device. That would qualify.
Great.
You have me on record saying that. So.
It has been recorded. So I'm just scrolling through. I think we've covered a lot of these. Sorry if we've missed a few, but it's difficult to scroll through them and ask them as we're going.
Yeah, I'm trying to get the questions on my. Right, okay. I've got them.
See, then if you see something that you haven't answered, feel free to list it.
Yeah, I'm just looking now. It's good to see so many participants. I'm just reading.
There is one here saying, can I get a grant for both community fibre broadband and for 4G, or is it one or the other?
When it's a community fibre broadband, I'm not sure what they.
Yeah, I'm guessing.
Let me clarify. If you can't have one grant for one thing and another grant for something else, it would be double funding, essentially. And bear in mind, if there's a cluster of you in a specific area with this slow broadband issue, you can club together. There are wireless and fiber providers, that will work with you. there was a community project in Crai, for example, in Powys. They all clubbed together. They went with a wireless provider called fyddai, and they're all getting over 30 megabits through our scheme. That worked very well. There are others across Wales. There's the Michaelston of Edw village in South Wales. They built their own fibre network. Again, we grant supported them. That is completely feasible, and you asked the team there, would they do it again? They said yes, we would. Fantastic effort. Or people can, if they want to, do their, look at doing their own kind of solutions with a neighbour, for example.
So we saw in your slideshow that you've installed your antenna on top, high on top of the scaffolding pole there. So have you seen that bad weather affects this at all? We've seen good weather lately, but should we have wind like we saw early this year and rain, would that affect it?
I was looking out for that myself because we had a lot of wind and rain here over the past few days, and it was absolutely fine. It made no difference. Netflix was working, the phone was working. I was doing speed tests. I was looking at the stats in the router, and it was all performing absolutely fine. I mean, it's a 3-meter scaffolding pole. It is a temporary installation. If I was going to do it permanently, I'd put it on the chimney pot, to be honest with you. But I wanted to try see how this technology works, and I've got to say I'm very impressed with it from my own personal perspective, and I think it's a real opportunity for those with poor broadband to get better broadband.
Yeah, ideal. Can you see any question there that you haven't answered so far? I'm still scrolling.
There's one here from Hugh Williams. He said he's had a MiFi, but the mobile signal in my kitchen office is no good. Well, again, that's a candidate for an externally installed 4G router. Radio waves are very, from mobile signals are very, very weak. They don't travel through things very well. The slide I showed you earlier, even with the mast within line of sight a mile from here, I was getting 30 megabits indoors, but as soon as I put it outside, it shot up to 82 or 83. And that's just by moving it. But a lot of people live in thickly stone walls, and they just won't go through. If anybody's tried to put a phone in a microwave, not switching it on obviously, but you will notice that the signal bar disappears straight away, because it's effectively what's called a Faraday cage. Keeps those microwaves which cook your meal inside the oven, but it also keeps signals from the outside going in as well, and it is through pieces of metal at the end of the day.
Great, diolch yn fawr iawn, Peter. Wyt ti'n gweld rhywbeth arall fan'na? Do you see anything else, or do you want to start wrapping up now?
Nothing that's
if we have missed anything, we'll try and cover.
Yeah, there's one. Yeah. Should I wear a tinfoil hat? No, I wouldn't worry about that.
Not yet.
Are there any suppliers that would cover the Welsh Pool area? Well, they can. If the others are a long way from you, then get in touch, because I thought there was one from Newtown listed.
AL Technical, I think, is it?
I'm not sure. I apologise. Yeah, and I think there's another one that goes up all over Wales, all over North Wales as well. I think Dyfed Telecom is that one, because they've recently advertised that they're covering North Wales as well. Whether Welsh Pool is reasonably north.
Yeah. Well, if you send us the list and the farmer gets in touch with the local development officer, we'll try and figure out which one is closest and which one can cover. So I'd like to finish off on a positive comment here. So Nick says, hi Peter, that all sounds great. I currently have a fibre package that in reality delivers non-fibre speeds. I think I currently receive around 7 to 8 megabytes download speeds in a rural setting. I currently use XLM Business for my connection and pay around £50 a month, including VAT for broadband and phone line. I have an excellent 4G connection here. I use Virgin on my phone, and the mast is approximately 1.5 miles away in line of sight. This sounds like a no-brainer, and I can't believe I haven't looked into this before. So
yeah, no, that's a good example, and I'd like to add on to that comment. And thank you, Nick. If you're currently on a fibre to the cabinet solution, which is giving you those really, slow speeds, you can look at getting what's called fibre to the premise on demand. If you're a business, which I think you are, you would qualify for what's called a gigabit voucher scheme, which is for fibre connections. You can drop me a note if you like. My email is on the end of these slides, or contact the team. But fibre to the premise on demand is quite a niche product, but it is out there for those who are on slower fibre to the cabinet only connections. So it's something to consider, but it costs quite a lot to put in, and the rentals for the first year or two are quite high. But then once those rentals have passed, you can then subscribe, to any fibre to the premise provider, and get them for around, get a connection for around what you're paying now, which is £50 a month.
Okay, great. Diolch, Peter. Diolch fawr iawn. So, if, as Peter said, he'll put a link to his email address on the slides that we'll put on our website, hopefully next week, along with the recording of this presentation for you to watch again if you've missed something or don't remember what's been said. And I apologise again if we haven't asked your question to Peter. We'll try and go through them before the end now, and try and get an answer, and we'll get that answer to you if we can. So diolch fawr iawn, Peter, o'n presentation. Dwi wedi dysgu lot yn hynna, dwi'n siŵr bod pawb arall wedi gwneud yn fath. We've all learnt a lot tonight, and hopefully it's an option that many of us will be able to look at in difficult areas to get broadband. So diolch fawr iawn.
Na fo, croeso, diolch i chi am drefnu. Thank you for organising.